brought to you each week and has been all throughout 2021 by our good friends at Bitmap Books. Now, they've actually got some recent reprints that are now in stock on their website, including Game Boy, the box art collection, their incredible CRPG book, and Amiga, a visual compendium. We'll talk more about those soon, but you can check out their full range of retro gaming books on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 307, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Robbie Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And here it is, our final show of 2021. What a ride it's been. And actually, I'm very pleased that you guys are showing your face again after the absolute thrashing that you got on the quiz last week.
Spoilers.
Yeah, you guys...
You know,
it was all a bit of a giggle.
I'm used to getting thrashed. I just brought Joe into it to, get someone else on board.
I feel like I haven't listened back to it because of the shame, but I feel like you probably got more answers than me on this year's. Like I say it every year, and I probably sound like such an idiot when I say it, but I'm like, I know all of their ones, I just don't know our ones.
Joe is such a sore loser.
I am.
No wonder we let him win every year.
Yeah, you've got to.
However, I do have to do a little correction because it turns out that I did make a bit of a mistake in one of the questions, and we've had a few people get in touch on Twitter. It turned out I said there was 2 games on the CDI, Faces of Evil and Wand of Gamelon, 2 Zelda games. It turns out there are actually 3 Zelda games, and I believe that Mark and Neil actually said one of them in their answer, and I marked it as incorrect, and that was Zelda's Adventure. So that means we've actually reworked out the scores again, and Joe and Ravi won.
Yeah.
We wish.
But it did close the window a little bit, so it meant that Mark and Neil got 28 and Paul and Ollie still led it with 30, but that gap is narrowed very slightly. I've seen Neil from RMC has been on Twitter asking his cave dwellers to try and find more questions that we got
I thought
wrong,
you were going to say asking his lawyers to get involved.
It could be.
Yeah, it could be the next step. It's getting closer now, but it's just a bit of fun, everyone. So, but it is always a bit of a highlight for the year. Even coming last, guys, I think you've got to agree.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
Giggle, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Great fun.
Now, this year, 2021, of course, it's been another weird year with the way that the world's been. Lockdowns around the world, COVID still
better,
dragging
though, hasn't it? It's been weird, but it's a bit better, a bit more bearable. That's what I'd say.
Or we're just getting used to it now, but it's kind of
just
the last
used
2
to the
years.
Weirdness, yeah,
have merged into one for me. Which is why, this is a bit of a tradition that every year we kind of look back on the biggest news stories and the biggest guests that we've had over the last year. There's so many I was looking at. I was like, was that 2020 or was that 2021? It's all felt like one long year. But there were, a lot of incredible things that have come out of this year. Of course, one of the main things was the Games Master reboot that I know we've talked about so much on the show. But all those 3 episodes are now available to watch on YouTube. And I think, just giving a quick overall verdict of it, as a couple of guys that watched Games Master back in the day, Ravi and I were very happy with the reboot. Joe, as a new viewer, you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I enjoyed it, yeah.
Hopefully they'll actually extend it to more than 3 episodes, which would be nice.
The reaction I've seen online, it does feel like everyone... I said this to a friend of mine. I said, if Games Master hadn't have been taken off air back in the late 90s and it continued to this day, this is probably what it would have ended up like.
Yeah, from what I've seen of it and stuff like that, I would agree with that. I think what's quite funny is, we don't want to go too much into it. It's just like people are like, oh, it wasn't retro games, but back then it wasn't retro games.
No.
It were modern games for the time period. And I was probably one of those people who expected it to be retro, maybe, but I wasn't surprised when it wasn't. I don't know. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. Episode 2 and 3 out. I've only seen the first one.
Oh, yeah, they're all up in the air.
You've got some catching up to do. And to be honest, you say it wasn't retro, but this year was absolutely mental for retro, like technology and developments. It was a crazy year where retro's pretty much blowing up again.
Well, I think, if there wasn't such a big buzz around retro, Games Master probably wouldn't have resurfaced. I think it's because of that interest that people have got in that era that probably is why it came back in the first place. We're talking about other things as well. Obviously, the Grand Theft Auto trilogy remake that we've talked about on the show over the last couple of weeks, that they are still patching to oblivion and trying to get it sorted out. So I wonder how many people are going to find that in their Christmas stocking this year.
No.
I've got a feeling I will.
with a load of coal.
Yeah.
That should have been the booby prize on the quiz.
It could have been. Yeah.
The Pi Storm, another big thing as well, that kind of made Amiga accelerators affordable for everyone. We talked about the Pi Storm. I did an entire video on that back in the summer as well. We got a new Dizzy game, Wonderful Dizzy. We had the Oliver twins on at the start of the year too. So, I mean, some incredible things have come out of 2021. And actually, we're going to be looking back on a few of the news stories and our favourite guests. Because, I mean, God, looking back, I don't know if you're the same. I know you are, Joe. I often forget who we've had on until I dig back into the back catalogue and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, it's been an incredible year for guests.
It's been an absolutely incredible year, and I have literally had to sit back and re-listen to like 5 episodes over the last couple of days because I have completely forgot who we've had on just because my memory has become so terrible this year. So it's becoming a dad. I have to remember everything.
Sleep deprivation.
Sleep deprivation. But we've had some incredible guests on. You know, we always, without sounding too big-headed, we always do. But with how everything was, with in and out of lockdowns and stuff like that through 2021 as well, a lot of these guests stepped up, and Ravi got some really, really big guys in, so it's been an awesome year.
This year I've felt that we've filled the gaps. Like, there's been people that we've always wanted to get on the podcast, and we've been hammering for like 4 or 5 years, like come on, and this year it like seemed to just rain amazing guests, and hopefully we're going to continue that into next year. And
yeah, you're right. In a way, the pandemic's kind of helped in some ways, because often we'd reach out to people and they'd be like, "Oh, I would do it, but I'm in Berlin doing a talk this weekend, then I'm at a gaming event in Paris the week after, and they didn't have time to sit down."
Or they didn't have setups. They didn't have Zoom setups and microphones and video cameras at home. But now they've got all of that set up because they've been doing online meetings, so it's easy just to kind of pop in and do an interview, which we're really thankful for, because we've had some stunners on this show.
Now, of course, there have been new console releases this year as well. Cast your mind back to January, when the first reviews started to come out after the Kickstarter backers got them in their hand. And I actually got hold of one of these and did a video on it back in the summer. And this is the Atari VCS console. Should we look back to that initial review back in January?
Go for it.
We did a Patrons Hangout actually the other day, and I think someone in the Patrons Hangout was a bit like, we're talking about the Atari VCS, the new version of it, and they were like, oh, that's vaporware. And then someone else was like, no, people have started to get them. So the new Atari VCS console, the new version of it that, kind of looks a bit like the classic wood grain console and keeps its name, has started to land into the hands of people who backed it on Indiegogo.
Yeah, it seems rarer than the PS5, which I think is quite funny. And it's still not there for public purchase. They're saying summer 2021 for that. But yeah, it's like you say, it's landing on some people's doorsteps, but with no kind of like notification of it. It's just appearing, apparently, that they don't know it's coming. So people are reviewing it and getting their hands on it. And, I'm not a technical guy, but long story short, from what you guys have told me and what the Hangout guys have told me and stuff, it is pretty much exactly what we expected it to be when we've discussed it in the past. It's just kind of like a nice-ish pre-made computer with Atari Classics built in.
Yeah, it's a nice review that they've done on Gaming Revolution, so they're looking at all of it. But you're right, it's like a kind of mythical beast. It just turns up. And
I love that. You're waiting for your Morrison's delivery, and the doorbell rings, and all of a sudden you're like, oh.
There's a VCS.
I remember ordering that.
But I still want my ice creams. Well, this review's really interesting. It's saying, there's a lot of problems which we fully expected. And I'm saying there's a lot of stuff to do with connectivity issues, actually. So even the controllers for the VCS are having problems with connectivity. The Wi-Fi is dropping out as well. So they're preferring to use the Ethernet port.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that could just be this guy's individual unit. We don't know that.
Oh, yeah. He could have tons of interference in his house. Who knows? But also they're saying it comes pre-installed with the Atari suite. That's the kind of only software, so there's no real killer apps. They do say that they are going to be bringing exclusive titles to the Atari store. But another thing that I found really interesting is they were talking about how it was, you could boot multiple OSs on there. But it actually turns out that the BIOS is locked. So you can boot multiple OSs, but you have to do it off like a USB stick, or you have to do it in a way that you're kind of defeating the BIOS. You know, I think it's password locked. So
yeah, I think it's secure boot, isn't it? And that kind of limits the amount of operating systems you can run. I think they've got to kind of be built for it. And like Windows can and Ubuntu kind of thing, but yeah, a lot won't be able to.
Yeah, some of those kind of Linux distributions and stuff like that. So, you know, this is a version that's going out to backers. It's not the public version yet. Hopefully with some firmware updates it can do it. But they are kind of saying what we thought, which was, you know, this is going to be an oddity. And there's a bit of a scathing statement at the end where he says, I don't even think it's going to be as popular as the Ouya, which is a bit of a killer statement there.
I mean, looking at the specs of it, and I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. The thing about it is, when this was announced a couple of years ago, it kind of looked like, you know, mid-level then. But he's saying in this review, I mean, you've got an AMD Ryzen embedded chip in there, an R16606G with the Vega 3 chipset, which is a system on a chip. He's saying, really, though, that's kind of a mid-range PC from a few years ago. So talking about performance, you're only really getting comparative performance to like a mid-range desktop PC. There's nothing amazingly powerful about this machine. You've got 8 gigabytes of RAM, which is looking a bit anemic in 2021. You can upgrade it, but interestingly, it turns out that upgrading the RAM and the internal storage isn't quite as simple as you think. I mean, essentially, you've got to completely strip the whole system down to its motherboard by the looks of it to get access to them. So it's not something that, you know, changing the hard disk and the RAM for most end users, you know, like on the PlayStation, you can just open a door and put a new disc in. This is going to require a little bit more effort than that, I think. And then you've got this operating system, which I know you were concerned about this, Ravi, when we mentioned it before, what the Atari VCS system software would be like. Unfortunately, I remember you saying that you were a bit worried that it wouldn't perform very well. It turns out that the first version of it, according to this review, doesn't perform that well at all. You've only got a couple of things on there. But he said it's, you know, even when you put it in 4K mode, the user interface is stuttering and lagging when it's on that resolution. You get Atari Volume 1 with a couple of classic Atari games in there as well. There's stuff like YouTube and Ant Streams on there by the looks of it as well. You've got your media apps like Plex and Disney Plus. You can run all those on there. But I mean, you can run those on like an Amazon Fire Stick. So it's nothing that anyone's going to buy this machine for. And the PC mode, that means you can boot into Windows 10. Really just getting a low to mid-range performance PC booting into Windows 10. So for the price, I mean, how much was this retailing for when it came out? I think it was like nearly $400 we mentioned.
It's interesting as well. I've seen people trying to run Cyberpunk on there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
no
and they're
doubt.
like, look, Cyberpunk's on the VCS, and it's just really slow. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is what we expected it to be. I mean, there are people on this article here who are kind of scathing the review a bit, saying, you know, your complaints are stupid. This is a pre-retail early release. Your reviews, disingenuous clickbait, someone is saying here. So, I mean, it is. It's a very early first version of it. And some things can be improved. There can be more applications on the store. The problem I think they're going to have is they've got to get a big enough crowd on there to attract those developers. There are some things, though, like the hardware, that limited hardware that's not looking very powerful in 2021. There's nothing they can do to fix that.
Just release the case. We'll all buy that. That's what I've said all along.
It does look cool. And again, I mean, we mentioned it last time. If this was like, you know, maybe 199 or 150 pounds, I'd probably buy one because it'd be a cool little media PC to put in my living room and run Plex on it and play a few emulated games and that kind of thing. But for $400, I mean, it's a bit of an ask, I think.
Yeah, like you say, if they just released it for like 150 quid or just released the shell for like 80 quid or 100 quid or something, I'm sure it'd probably make so much more money than trying to release it as a console. But we'll see. We'll see how it does when we talk about it this time next year or this in the summer.
So there you go, the Atari VCS, which I don't know if after the reviews and the general word around that system, you guys are tempted to ask for one from Santa this year.
I've got 2 coming. I'm joking.
You know what, though? And it's a shame to say it, and I know there have been a few updates on it. I haven't set mine up.
And we like to rag on it as well, and I know there's some VCS fans out there. So, you know, it's good to see that Atari's back, and they've been doing a lot of activity this year, haven't they? They've been absolutely everywhere, and they've even been releasing like physical games, but also going into cryptocurrency and hotels,
Moby games.
Oh god, all of that. Yeah.
Yes, it's been a very interesting year for Atari. And, if we're looking forward to 2022, I would say that is probably the one company where I've got no idea what they're going to do next.
Yeah, that's true. Unpredictable.
Talking about other console announcements this year as well, it was a year that we found out the Amiga is getting made into a mini console with the announcement back in the summer of the A500 Classic. Now let's get into this story that's been absolutely everywhere, because we've been looking every week. We do our little thing. We chat on Facebook Messenger, like, you guys spotted any retro news this week? Joe and I saved them in our Facebook saved section, and we put them in a Google Doc and everything. Today we've been looking around, and literally everything was just Amiga Mini.
Well, could I just do something that I've waited for 28 years to do?
You built this up now. This better be good.
Amiga is back, baby.
All right, that was worth the wait.
It never went, Ravi. You guys have been keeping it alive.
But this is now, obviously it's the guys who brought us the 64, which was the Commodore 64 Mini that came out a few years ago now. Then they made the Maxi version, which was a full-size, essentially a Commodore 64 replica, FPGA-based, full keyboard on there as well. This one is one of the mini ones, though. Now, you actually get some really cool stuff with this.
And also, it's kind of taken 28 years to get to this point, because nothing commercially has kind of been released from the Amiga, because there's been legal battles and stuff. So this is the closest thing to anything official you're going to get. But you know what? This is a mini console, and I don't really think it's aimed at me and Dan, who already have Amigas coming out of our ears. It's aimed at someone like Joe, who is a brand new user, and you were actually looking at getting a CD32, weren't you? So what do you think of this machine, and what appeals about it and what doesn't?
Okay, well, I'll start with what doesn't appeal about it is that they're trying to keep the pricing with Amiga going, with it being nice and expensive compared to other consoles. I think it's quite a lot for a mini console that's coming out at £120.
Which, if you try and get an Amiga 500, though, some of them go for about 300 quid boxed, good condition now.
I do get that, but if you want to use that same argument with like the Sega Mega Drive Mini, which was like 60 quid at release, and at the time you could get a Mega Drive for like 30 quid. But I get it, you get all the games with it, and what I do like about it, which is one of the reasons I've always been kind of put off old school computers and stuff, is it's going to be a plug and play. You're not going to have to piss about. As Ravi just said, changing all the hardware on it, pissing about with cards and stuff like that. It is just going to be, I'm assuming, plug it in and you go ahead and you play it. You plug it into your TV. I really like that you get the controller, the mouse, and the keyboard. I'm not familiar with Amiga controllers, so I don't know if that's...
In this version, the keyboard, because when they released the C64 Mini, they had the keyboard wasn't working, so you had to plug an external one in. And then they released one called the Maxi, which had a working keyboard. And I guess that's because of the price range, to get all those keys going and everything.
Yeah, and the size.
The size, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I was just saying, I think it's expensive, but I do understand. I will probably buy one. I do really like the look of it, and I like the sound of the games on there as well. It's going to have 25 games on it, and they revealed 12 so far. But what I really, really, really like about it is this is one of the first kind of big release mini consoles I've seen where they are actually advertising that you can put your own USB stick and run your own Amiga ROMs on it.
Yeah,
and also firmware updates. So for hackability,
you don't see that. I mean, you can do it with the PlayStation Mini and stuff, but that's not something that they were openly saying they can do. Whereas this seems to be pretty open. Stick USB stick in and play some other Amiga ROMs on there. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing a bit of Zool, Worms, Chaos Engine, and then also Simon the Sorcerer, one you guys always go on about. But yeah, I think it looks cool, and I will agree. I don't think it's aimed at Dan. I don't think it's aimed at Ravi. I think it is aimed at people like me who never quite got into it, or some people like your brother Dan who are nostalgic for it. He might pick one up and be like, yeah, you know what? I've not had an Amiga in 28 years. I'll buy one and I'll buy one of these and play it. I think it will do all right.
And I think it will increase the user base of people interested in Amiga. If you like someone's mum's going around and goes, "Oh, you used to have that," and then buys it, then other people may go, "Oh, I'll actually get one of the original machines, or I'll get one of these new faster ones or something." So I think it opens it up a bit.
Well, let's talk a bit about what comes with it then. So you've got the Amiga, well, it's called the A500 Mini. There's no Amiga branding on here because, as we know, the world of Amiga copyrights and licenses, they're very, very complicated. There've pretty much been litigation and court cases going on for 25 years now.
Yeah. Since Commodore went, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So this is the A500, it's called, but it looks pretty much identical to, if you can imagine an Amiga 500, smaller than your mobile phone, actually, really small little device. It comes with a replica of the original Amiga 500 mouse that is affectionately known as the tank mouse. By the looks of it, a USB version. And there's actually a photo of the A500 Mini next to the mouse, and it looks really cute. It's really small.
And that's essential as well. They could have packed it with a D-pad that would mean that you'd control up and down and like the mouse play, but that really wouldn't work with games like Simon the Sorcerer. Or
Lemmings. Imagine trying to play that with a D-pad. But then you get a controller with it as well, which this has been a bit controversial. Some people are like, because most of us played Amiga games with a joystick originally. That said, I do know a lot of people that use Mega Drive pads on them back then, and this is actually a pad that you get with it, not a joystick. It looks like kind of an evolution of the CD32 controller.
Yeah,
in many ways,
and the original CD32 controllers were absolutely awful. Like the D-pads were really bad on them.
This looks nicer.
And this looks a lot nicer and a lot more playable. So actually, even the controller alone would be something that I'd be interested in.
Well, it looks like a cross between a CD32 controller and a SNES controller, really. The colour scheme on it. Nice D-pad on there. You got the two buttons in the middle like the CD32. Then you got the different colour buttons. That's quite like a SNES. Shoulder buttons on the top as well. What I haven't read is, because I know there are some kind of third-party controllers available for the Amiga where you can actually map, like, say, the Y button to be the up button. Because a lot of Amiga games, platforms in particular,
jump,
it was up to jump, which if you can remap this, so like you could use one of the buttons to jump, that would make, I think a lot of the complaints that I've seen today would be answered. People are like, trying to jump up on a platform with a control pad can be very fiddly. But yeah, apart from that, it is what you expect, I think. Like you said, Joe, you can put a USB stick in there. It's got WHD load support, which lets you install Amiga games to a hard disk. You can just download loads of them, put the stick in, and really enhance your library. And even though this looks like an Amiga 500, apparently it is going to be able to play later Amiga games like the AGA chipset of the Amiga 1200 as well. So A1200 only games should work on here too. So really, this is going to give you access to pretty much every Amiga game, all the mainstream ones. And should run great on
It's
here.
got 3 ports at the back, so I guess one's going to be for the mouse, and then you could have 2 joystick or gamepad ports, which means you can do that 2-player co-op experience, which is essential with games like Chaos Engine and stuff, when you're sitting together with your mate, or Speedball, and then you could use any USB controller in there, I reckon.
Yeah, and you got HDMI output and just a power connector, and that is it. So, yeah, really it is. It's an Amiga emulator that's in a cute little case. It's plug and play. And really, this is going to make life, as simple as using a Mega Drive or a Super Nintendo Mini. So really, it is a small consoleized plug and play Amiga, which I think, if you haven't got a background with the platform, which is a complaint I've seen today, people are like, well, can it boot Workbench? Can I, you can plug a keyboard in. So, it probably could, but it's not aimed at that market. This is aimed at people that are going to see it in game or HMV, and people that maybe owned one 30 years ago, or people like Joe that have probably heard a lot about the Amiga, probably through us rattling on about it, and actually maybe want to experience that world. And admittedly, it is quite pricey for these kind of systems. But at £120, I think it is still affordable for people that want to get hold of it and experience it.
Also for young people, I've seen a lot of people saying this is ideal for me to give to the kids, and have the kids, they don't want them on their original hardware. Have the kids have this machine, and they could spill Coca-Cola all over it, and they can go mental, And,
my nephew would be like, can it play Fortnite? Oh, it's rubbish. So have we got a release date on this then?
It just says 2022.
Yeah.
But that's all it says.
Which isn't far away now, 2022, actually.
Yeah, it's hard. It's kind of like, is it going to be in 4 or 5 months' time, or is it in a year's time? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, it just says 2022 at the moment, but we've got, like I say, 12 games. So Alien Breed 3D, Another World, all-terrain racing, battle chess. Is that Cadaver? Kickoff 2, Pinball Dreams, and then Simon the Sorcerer, Speedball 2, Chaos Engine, Worms Director's Cut, and Zool on there.
They're big games.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure they're... I mean, I'm like you say, I'm not a big Amiga boy, but
it's a lot of the
sure
Team 17.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure they're
games.
pretty big games.
And you know what? I'm just happy that something's come out, because if something hadn't have come out, it probably would have just been lost in the legacy of time. And, you know, it's nice to see the Amiga up there with the other mini consoles, and it brings a new audience to it as well.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, something like this, I think, you know, just, even though you said before, you know, it's not aimed at me and Ravi, don't know about you, Ravi, I'm going to buy one of these. I just want one in the living room, just to play Amiga games in there.
I'm going to buy a Mega 65 as well. Just to have
all
the
bases.
two systems, yeah. But this will be the drunk one. This will be the one that I spill all my beer all over.
And we've got a release date on that now, and the new games list actually got announced since we recorded the quiz last week, which obviously we haven't talked about. I know you're a little bit upset about the omission of Sensible Soccer on there, Ravi.
I think that Sensible Soccer itself on like a stick would sell. Just, you know, because that's the one that has so many memories associated with it, but also Lemmings, you know. But it's cool, the games that they've got on there. I think it's a good little system, but I can really just see, like, you know, a box with Lemmings and Sensible Soccer, people going mad. But I shouldn't complain, because we've got a good list of games, and we've got an Amiga Mini coming out, and I think that's just going to increase the user base. And to be honest, I was thinking at this point, when they announced this, that the mini market's dead. I was thinking, you know, there's not much interest in minis and stuff, and they seem to have, because this is one of the late minis, isn't it? They seem to have kind of ridden it and continued that mini market.
It kind of feels like to me that there's been a demand for something like this for about 20 years, you know, from Amiga fans.
And thank God it's come out before it's 30 and everyone forgets.
Well, I mean, we're looking here, and there's games like, you know, Worms, the Director's Cut's been announced as well, which is, you know, to me, the pinnacle of kind of 2D Worms games. Quack, which is quite an interesting choice. You know, that was a really good game. I think that was Team 17, I've got a feeling. Stuff like Zool on there as well. Arcade Pool, another great Team 17 game. Alien Breed 3D's on there as well.
Chaos Engine, which is good.
Yeah. Which we've got a release date on that now. It's going to be coming out the March 25th, 2022, so only a few months to wait. Unfortunately, didn't make it for the Christmas market, but hopefully our bank balances have all kind of been recharged a bit after Christmas by then.
Well, that's been another part of 2021, which has been chip shortages and general shortages everywhere to get stuff out.
And I've got a feeling this is going to be a gateway drug to get Joe into the Amiga. I'm excited to
I'm going to be grabbing
see
one.
what you make.
It's got Simon the Sorcerer on it for your
Simon
wife,
the Sorcerer
Joe,
on for my wife, for it to play through and then tell me how good it was, and then I could pretend I played it. No, I'm joking. I will be playing it.
Didn't your wife play Simon the Sorcerer as a kid and you didn't know?
Yeah, literally. I had absolutely no idea, but when we were talking about it on the show in August, I kind of came downstairs after we recorded, and I was like, oh yeah, I spoke about the Amiga Mini today. And she was like, oh, Simon the Sorcerer. And I was like, what? She was like, Simon the Sorcerer on the Amiga. It's like, what? How do you know about that? And she was just like, when I used to play it on my Amiga. And I was like, what do you mean on your Amiga? Like, it just like blew my mind. It turned out her mum and dad had an Amiga. They had like Worms, Simon the Sorcerer, Worms again, Zool on it. You know, and I was just like, we've been together 15 years and I never knew this. Like, it never come up in any sort of conversation ever. Her whole family know that I do the podcast, like, and that I'm passionate about gaming. No, never thought to mention it ever in like 15 years. So yeah, she wants one, which is, you know, one of the first times she's ever actually proactively said spend some money on a mini console. So looking forward to that.
I reckon we kick Joe off the podcast and get her on.
Yeah, maybe. It's probably a good idea.
And of course, we finally got a good video game movie this year. I know you and I absolutely love this, Joe. I know you thought it was all right, Ravi. This is Mortal Kombat when it came out back in the summer.
Yeah, I thought it was all right, yeah.
And here's a moment when we first got the trailer and analysed it on the show back in the early part of this year. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I've got quite a few thoughts about it, and you know, we're not the retro 3 hours, so you know, I'll try and keep it short. And I know Ravi's got a few things he wants to say about it, but I think it looks good. I like the look of it. I like the visual style. I love that, you know, they've got all these characters in. I think they've got like 10 or 11, 12 characters in there. They've not overdone it with like 30 of them, and they've not underdone it with like concentrating on like 2 or 3 of them. It looks like from the trailer, Sub-Zero's a bad guy and Scorpion's a good guy, which I'm sure is the other way around in the games. I could be wrong. It could be wrong.
And Kano's a good guy in this.
Is Kano a good guy? I don't know. I thought he was
Apparently
a bad guy from the trailer. But
right, interesting.
But what I thought was really interesting is, and kind of annoying until I looked into it a little bit more, they've introduced a new character called Cole Young, played by Lewis Tan, who seems to be the main character. Now, I'm pretty familiar with Mortal Kombat. I've played them all. I don't remember anybody called Cole Young in the games. So I was a little bit, for God's sake, they're not like they've done with Resident Evil films and introduced their own character and all this kind of stuff, I don't care about him. I want to know about, Liu Kang and Jax and Sub-Zero, who are all in the films, all big characters in the films, but the main character seems to be this Cole Young. However, I'm not going to spoil it. I don't know how true it is or anything, but if you go out there on the internet, he is somebody from Mortal Kombat. He is somebody. So, if you want to check that out, it's on the internet. It's been leaked. The script's been leaked and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool where they're going with it from what I've read. But Ravi, you weren't as keen on it as me and Dan, were you?
No, I'm not that into modern action movies, and looking at this trailer, there's some good points, like Shogun Assassin, which I count as one of the biggest influencers. Halfway through, there's a section. I'm not sure which enemy it is. I'm not up to date on Mortal Kombat, but this is a total tribute to Shogun Assassin. Like the point where he has a blade that goes into the wall and then goes down with the blood. That's like one of the famous scenes in Shogun Assassin, which was one of those, it was actually banned back in the days and it was a direct influence. So I think that's quite good, but it's just the actors, like the way that they're speaking, they just seem so bad. And like, I get that it's an action movie and you're really there for the action and stuff, but it just feels a bit like, I don't know, High School Musical 2 or something like.
Ravi, I'm going to have to agree with your point there about. There's a moment in the movie, and Scorpion is my favourite Mortal Kombat character.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. Yeah,
I'm going to listen to this.
Yeah, I don't know what is that.
Is that Arnie? Arnie's voice. That sounded like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I don't know what.
I expect him to say to the chopper next.
Yeah, I remember hearing that and thinking, what on earth is that? Like, but I guess it's because they're being realistic. He's muffled by his mask. Like, I
thought, they could have done this really well. It does look good, and there's so many references to the old Japanese movies here. And with the kind of sunset going and the shadows and stuff, silhouettes and stuff like that. But they could have done what they did with like Cobra Kai or Stranger Things, and they could have had a fat synth doing going through that, and then they could have gone kind of a bit like retro-y.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure towards the start of the trailer you can kind of hear in the background the Mortal Kombat song, like a kind of like sort of remix of it. I could be completely wrong. I've only seen the trailer twice.
I know what you want, Joe.
I do. I want it. I want it in there. So we'll see.
A lot of people are saying online that this looks like really cheesy and stuff, and people are saying it looks fun. But people obviously don't remember the original Mortal Kombat movie if you want cheesy, even though that was a load of fun. But I think it kind of feels like this movie has grown with the Mortal Kombat series. I mean, the first one, it was naff, but it really felt like, it was a tribute to the games as they were then. But looking at this, I mean, there's one bit in the trailer that I thought was incredible. When you see Sub-Zero freezing his own blood and using that as a knife, that is something I could imagine being in one of the modern Mortal Kombat games.
Yeah. You see, I don't like those games, so that's scary.
Oh, Ravi, get off, man. Get out of here.
Too much of a wimp.
Too much of a bloody wimp. Yeah, man. And apparently there is fatalities in the film. Like, obviously it's not going to be like, I'm guessing it's not going to be quite like finish him and they're stood there like dizzy.
The actors have to remember the combo.
Yeah, but apparently there is like, people do actually get killed and they're going to get, like you say, splattered with ice knives.
I think there'll be a babality.
Babality. Ravi will go see it if there's a babality in it.
Yeah, I'll give you a gift. There you go.
So we hyped for the second part though of Mortal Kombat?
I enjoyed Mortal Kombat. I am hyped. I thought the whole, I don't want to spoil it, but the main character thing was a bit odd. But I did really enjoy it. I'm just sad that there was no hype for the Resident Evil film that came out this
I know.
year.
That just came and you're the only person I know who's ever mentioned it.
I think I'm the only person who's seen it. Like, we touched on it on the podcast like last week. But yeah, no, Mortal Kombat, man. I don't want to take away from that. I thought it was really awesome. It was fun, but spoilers. Skip 10 seconds ahead if you don't want to hear it. But just thought it was interesting that it isn't actually the Mortal Kombat tournament. It's set before it. So I'm looking forward to the second one to see the tournament.
And to be honest, it's not been an amazing year for movies as well, because so many have been held back.
Yeah, that's true. And Mortal Kombat is one of the ones where they actually took the plunge and just thought, you know what, we'll stick it on Amazon and we'll stick it, for people to pay for, at home, which I think they should have done with a lot of films. So I'm glad they did that. I think I rented it on Amazon. In fact, no, actually, I think I might have seen it in other ways. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And next year, of course, more video game movies coming up. We've got the new Mario movie, Sonic 2, which we talked about in the podcast a couple of weeks ago. So a lot more to look forward to in the next 12 months. Now, before we get into some more stories that have been the highlights of 2021 and look back on some of our favourite guests of the year as well, let's give a moment to give a big thank you to a big supporter of the Retro Hour podcast, our friends at monsterjoysticks.com. Now, we love Monster Joysticks. They offer a wide range of quality arcade joysticks, not only for your modern machines, your PCs, your Raspberry Pis, but also for retro machines as well. And I love the sound they make. Oh, listen to that, boys.
Those lovely
Isn't
micro
that just bliss?
switches.
Oh, beautiful on the ears. And we've all got Monster Joysticks as well. I know, actually, you got a little package through the door in the last week, Joan. That's going to be your little project over Christmas to assemble your own.
I have, yeah. And I'm very nervous about assembling it myself. But I have been reassured many times by the both of you that it is actually very, very simple and it does just clip together. So I'm trusting that. So if I can do it, I'm sure anybody else can do it because I'm a muppet. But yeah, I've had it out the box and just, playing with some of the parts and stuff like that. You can just tell it is top quality. And like you say, those micro switches, man, they're amazing.
And you've got the model where you can put a Raspberry Pi in it. So I kind of got an image on a Raspberry Pi, chucked it to you, and you're going to be able to put that in there and have it as a standalone little kind of arcade unit, essentially.
Yeah, my own kind of standalone arcade cabinet in the palm of my hand, essentially, which is just amazing.
Can you imagine having something like that when you were a kid? If someone had told you could have that, you'd be like, well, no way.
It's mind-blowing. I'm still, even as these things have been around for a little while now, but absolutely mind-blowing that you can just have this amazing hardware that can do that for you.
So they do these retro gaming joystick kits, and it works with everything from your classic computers like the Amiga, the Atari ST, Commodore 64, the Spectrum. They do versions for consoles too, like the Mega Drive, CD32. There's a PC Engine version as well. And what we're talking about then, these all-in-one 9-button Raspberry Pi arcade sticks where you actually put the Raspberry Pi inside the joystick and it gives you a truly portable arcade quality experience. And they've got deluxe kits that you can get with the genuine Sanwa arcade parts. It gives that lovely click, designed to survive the most extreme usage. And you've all seen me playing games like Golden Axe or Mortal Kombat. When I lose, this thing's had a bit of a ragged round.
Survived Dan's raging.
Exactly, and it survived. Really high precision parts available as well. And they do more budget friendly arcade part options too. Assembly is so easy. You don't need a soldering iron, nothing like that. Just a screwdriver, and we can put these together in it took me about 10-15 minutes to put mine together, Ravi, if you're about the same.
Yeah, I put mine together and I've got an Amiga one, which is absolutely amazing because you can reprogram the up to jump, basically. Nice. Little switch on the back changes it to a button, which is so useful for some games.
So why don't you treat yourself and, of course, support the podcast. Head to their website, monsterjoysticks.com. Now, going back to the start of the year, do you remember this was all over the general news websites as well? That GameStop, which obviously is a massive gaming store all across America mainly, that they were in really bad trouble. And all of a sudden they had this massive surge in stock. It turned out thanks to Reddit. Now, this next story, I must admit, made me feel rather thick when I heard about this last week. Because, we've been covering the demise of the game store, in particular GameStop in America, who last year tried to do that, transforming a few of their stores into retro gaming lounges, to try and get people back in there. Then obviously the pandemic struck and they're really struggling now. But then all of a sudden their stock price actually went through the roof last week. And I know, Ravi, you've been keeping a close eye on this because it's not just GameStop. There are also a few other companies from the past that seem to be getting propped up by people on Reddit who are investing in them.
Yeah, I'm going to try and explain it, and I'm known worldwide for my business acumen, so this is going to be really accurate.
We call him Ravi Sugar.
Off the back of this, Ravi's going to be like, right, this is what you need to do in the stock market. Like,
send me all your stocks. No, I've been looking at this, and the way I'm going to try and explain this.
Simplify it, man. Because
sorry if I get this up.
Because when Dan said he feels thick, I feel thick on every bloody episode of this show. So okay, really simplify.
Ravi's the only smart one among us.
So I'll simplify it. So you know, GameStop, like you said, they were trying to kind of get people in. They were trying to turn it into this more of a destination venue, and then COVID struck, so people weren't buying games. Full stop. So what happens is when that happens, you get a lot of short sellers who basically go, oh, this company is going to go bankrupt. So we are going to buy loads of stock, short sell our stock and say, oh, okay, it's going to go bankrupt. So let's make a bit of money out of it going bankrupt. Now, what seemed to happen was, this is usually really predictable. What seemed to happen was the Reddit guys were like, no, we don't want GameStop to go bankrupt. So what we're going to do is all team together, put a little bit of money into the stocks and basically, well, a lot of money into the stocks and basically boost it. So what happened was all these kind of stock people and hedge fund people that were predicting GameStop to go down, suddenly all their predictions were completely wrong. And they lost £70 billion. And it's absolutely mental. And then this trend started happening with other stores. So Blockbuster, which, remember, Blockbuster has one store in Bend, Oregon, went up 700%, which was just mad because people were like, just buy Blockbuster stock, just going crazy. And then Nokia as well. So I think, like, obviously this is a whole financial thing, but the interesting thing is the choice of companies here. And I think this is like, you know, people are saying, oh, these companies don't have value anymore. And this is kind of Reddit and the internet saying, actually, they do have a bit of a value. You know, it might be different to what you guys expect. And I was going to ask you guys, if you think there's a company in the UK, like, that would kind of
Wimpy.
do with one of these surgeons. Wimpy would be a perfect example. Everybody knows Wimpy. It was in America. That would be a perfect example. Wimpy, Maplin's.
Maplin's.
Yeah, Woolworths.
Yeah, Woolworths. Yeah, you know the thing that I don't get here. Now, I've been seeing this everywhere. Does this actually help the companies, though?
No, I don't think it does, actually, because it's right. Because, you know, people, once you get to that level with all the stock, you have to sell it to someone, don't you? So even if you've made all this profit, who wants to buy GameStop stock at like $325 a share? I think it's more of a kind of a proving a point thing. There may be a few people that have made money on it, but I don't. You know, it definitely brings a lot of attention to GameStop. Like all the all the outlets around the world are talking about it at the moment. I even like turned on the radio and they were like GameStop. I was like, geez, wow.
Because I've been seeing people saying, oh, that's it, GameStop is saved now thanks to Reddit. But then I've seen other angles on it where it was essentially, you know, a group of guys, well, quite a large community on Reddit who essentially wanted to stick it to the traders on Wall Street and, like, you know, show them up, really.
I think that's what it was. It was just like saying, you know, you guys don't think there's value in it. We think there's value in these nostalgic kind of things. And then just kind of showing that the system's a bit broken if this can happen, to be honest.
I don't know the name of the guy, but didn't some billionaire Wall Street guy who's British went on like BBC News the other day and he was just like, you're ruining it for the billionaires, you're ruining it for us all. He was just like, you're just sat at home on your benefits while hardworking people like me are losing their money, and you just
I think initially they went out and they did that with the companies, but then there's been a lot of stuff where like the app that they were using to buy the stock suddenly stopped letting them buy them.
Is it Robin Hood or something?
Trying to protect the investors rather than the public, and that's what really enraged people. But I think the main point for the Retro Hour is these are nostalgic companies and people are kind of bringing attention to them, which is pretty mad. And we're recording this on Saturday the 31st, and this is moving really fast, guys. Sunday the 31st of January. This is moving really fast.
2021.
Yeah. So by the time this comes out, it could be completely different, and who knows which companies could come back. We should start some retro hour stock, shouldn't we?
I just had this vision of, like, you know, the CEO of GameStop, like, waking up last Monday morning and be like, what the hell? Looking at his phone, it's gone up, like, you know, 2,000% overnight or something.
Commodore, where are you, man? Commodore, come on.
I think there is actually, isn't there a Commodore that make mobile phones or something somewhere in Europe?
Yeah, because you know, Magnavox or something could go huge. Who knows?
Well, the power of the internet. So, yeah, like you said, definitely an interesting story, something we haven't seen before. So we'll keep an eye on that developing story. That was so bizarre, that story, wasn't it?
It was weird. Like in these crazy times, you know, people are going for like crypto and stocks and all of this kind of stuff. And I'd say like there was a huge surge in Reddit, but in GameStop stock, but actually it's gone back down again now by the time we're reporting this. So if you were in that surge, I hope you sold when it was high.
Yeah, it essentially turned out to be a massive trolling, didn't it, of GameStop, really, I guess.
Yeah, it was kind of gaming it. It was like a video game in itself.
Very bizarre. Something else that came out, I mean, obviously the Giga Leak has been the gift that's kept on giving all throughout the year, but obviously we've got a massive PlayStation leak as well that we talked about back in the summer, where 747 prototype games, many of which are playable, were actually released.
Yeah, we've actually, we're a bit PlayStation heavy on this episode, aren't we, Ravi? But it is all relevant.
That's the way it falls sometimes, isn't it?
It's funny. So this is the first story about PlayStation. So this is massive. This is one of the biggest leaks I can think of, you know, recently. It's probably as big as the Nintendo leak. We've mentioned these guys before. What are they called? Is it Hidden Palace?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Hidden Palace have released this. This is a massive leak of 747 prototype games leaked from the PlayStation 2. So this is like all the different versions of like games that came out, essentially, or games that never came out. It's a complete mismatch of all different, like, you know, different translations of games and stuff like that. But essentially, this is from one guy's collection who spent the last couple of years kind of, you know, buying and getting a hold of from, like, you know, ex-PlayStation developers and stuff, all the prototypes and stuff.
Well, I've got some details here. So it's called Project Deluge. It's got its own kind of name. And a lot of these titles are like prototype versions of games that are out there, retail versions. But, you know, they're the prototypes. So they may have levels in there that weren't in there. Later on, they may have assets that have been removed or changed. So I think this is going to be really interesting once fans get through this and kind of break down what's in these games. It's going to, you know, bring up some new information and maybe cool little facts and stuff. You know, all the fact hunters on YouTube will be really excited about this one.
Yeah.
Looking at it, you're right. It was actually from the old Q&A department. So they were backups, and it was one person, you're right, who single-handedly took possession of these and kind of copied every single one. Now, they had a huge amount of data, so they asked friend of the show, Jason Scott from the Internet Archive, to take a look at it. And this data was just full of retail versions as well. You know, the prototypes were kind of hidden in it with,
they were hidden
with a
within,
load of
weren't
stuff.
they? Yeah.
So they ended up creating a program that would look for the codes on it and the metadata, and then actually remove all the retail versions and create this absolutely crazy list. It brings it to a total of 860 gigabytes of data.
But what gets me is they're saying the 747 games is only a part of it. It's not all of them. That's just what they've released so far. Apparently there's even more out there, like thousands of more for them.
Yeah,
to still
there might be
upload.
half-built ones that haven't been, you know, found with this tool. Like, this tool's just kind of scraped it, and then manually you might be able to find some more. It's a mad archive. There's a huge list here that I sent you earlier.
This is the thing, like you were saying, you know, the game Alias, you know, that's definitely Dan's favourite game, but the game Alias, there's like 20 versions of it on there because it's like the different builds of the game, which is crazy. So how many PlayStation 2 games was there? It was a good couple of thousand. If you got to think there might be like 10 versions, 10 prototypes of like Final Fantasy X-2. for people to go through. So yeah, like I'm expecting them to probably keep releasing like hundreds and hundreds more of these.
And there's like also, it looks like there's a lot of preview versions in there. So there's like versions that went out to the press.
Yeah,
review copies.
The E3 versions as well of like Crash Bandicoot and stuff like that.
It's mad. It's amazing to see, and what a momentous effort, and kind of contacting this one person, and then that one person preserving it all. Fantastic.
He's just there like, yeah, I've got like 1,000 gigabytes of PlayStation 2
Just
games.
imagine how much it cost in CDs. Burning that.
God.
God.
It is cool, though, because, I mean, obviously the PlayStation 2, the biggest selling console in history. And, when you get a glimpse into all these different versions of the games, because you always saw it in magazines or, around that era, you'd read it on websites as well, kind of looks at new games that were coming out, and then often they'd be released and they'd be totally different. And I remember a lot of times looking at games and thinking, it looked much better in the preview. So it's going to be interesting. Even just, you're talking games like, Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, kind of seeing how they changed over time and what those early ideas were for these titles. I think, that's fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. And was it CDs or was it DVD on the PlayStation? Like, this shows my lack of knowledge, Yeah,
it was
maybe
both.
they were.
I think some of them would be, they'd have the black, like the PS1 on one side, on the reverse, and then some of them were DVD, weren't they?
Yeah, like blue, weren't they?
Yeah. But I think after the first couple of years, they were all DVD, weren't they?
Imagine also, like, they're talking about some of the big localization ports as well and stuff. Maybe there might be translations that haven't been on other versions of games that they could then implement later on. Like, they might be able to take some of these features and do, ROM hack style fan build kind of new versions of these titles.
And at the time recording this, I mean, there's kind of been no backlash from Sony over this. No takedowns or anything as far as we can see, which, obviously when it happens to Nintendo, normally by the time we've talked about it, it's gone.
Download as quickly as possible, guys, all this data.
Again, we can't really endorse these kind of hacks and leaks and stuff, but it is all so interesting, isn't it, looking at these for the first time?
It's kind of been coming out in like little chunks, this news has, because they've had to basically go through this whole leak and find these games. It's really interesting as well that there's some Saturn and CDI stuff done, and PS2 games, also Xbox and Dreamcast ones. So, this is the kind of gift that keeps giving.
Now, in just a moment, we're going to look back on some of our favourite guests that we've had on the Retro Hour throughout 2021. But now that we've reached the end of another year, we just want to take a moment to give a big thank you to the people who've actually helped us out on our journey and helped us get through another year of doing this podcast. Because seriously, without our patrons, we wouldn't have made it this far.
No, absolutely. And you are right there. Without the Patreon, the show literally wouldn't have carried on. We didn't know what we were going to do about a year and a half ago. The fans have done it for us. We've managed to carry on, and it's been absolutely amazing. And, we like to give a little something back. We don't just take the money. We do the after hours, the extra show, which we have just done, which was all about Christmas, which was really, really fun. And we also do our monthly hangouts, which we just did last Sunday, which was the Christmas party, which was really fun, wasn't it?
Everyone was wearing naff Christmas jumpers. Yeah. We all had a bit of a drink. Yeah. And, what I love about that is, and, we've said it over the last couple of months, that it really feels now like almost like a virtual users group.
Yeah, 100%. Everybody comes on and we all help each other. We all talk about, we all learn something. We all spend a bit of money as well because we're all talking about the things that we've picked up. But yeah, it's just awesome, like going through people's collections and just finding out what everybody's been up to, like over the last couple of weeks and stuff like that. But that's not the only thing you get for being a patron. We also do ad-free episodes. Dan works away and tries to get the episode out sometimes about 3 days early, usually a day or two early. So yeah, we do like to give back, and we do appreciate everything that we do get through the Patreon, and also just appreciate everybody who just checks us out and listens to us as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we love doing this podcast, and our patrons have, if you ever thought of a time to join Patreon, now is actually a very good time because we've got our 6th birthday of this show coming up in 2 weeks' time, which does mean, unfortunately, all of our costs get suddenly renewed. Website hosting, audio, all of that suddenly comes out of our bank accounts in January. So if you ever want a time that's a good time to support this show, then maybe just consider doing it. You can do it. I mean, I think our lowest tier is like $3 a month.
Which is like about 70, 80p an episode for ad-free, which is amazing.
we really appreciate any help we get with this. And of course, we continue to put all of our heart and soul and efforts into doing this. And hopefully you'll continue enjoying this show all throughout 2022 as well. Now, before we get into the guests, someone else who's been a massive supporter of the Retro Hour podcast, for an entire year, and we're pleased to say they're going to be supporting us again throughout 2022, is our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. How much do we love Bitmap Books?
Bitmap Books have been absolutely amazing for us, and we do absolutely love their books. We were fans of the books before they contacted us about sponsorship. They're absolutely amazing.
And if you want books that are real celebrations, particularly of the visual style of books. I mean, I look over, I've got a collection of their books on my shelf next to me now. And, I don't think it's going too far to say these are works of art.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the thing. Video games are works of art. And then to get them kind of put onto the paper into these books, it's just like, you've got that physical work of art there on your shelf. I've got the Master System game, the Master System book, which is just amazing. You always get like 200-300 pages, all about the games and all the pixel artwork. And it's just such high quality images in there as well, which is amazing.
And Joe, this week, if you order this month in December, you can get a free pair of Sonic socks as well
nice.
As each order while stocks last. So, that's an extra incentive for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe you're at home right now and, you might be off work for a couple of weeks over Christmas. You want something good to have a look at. They've actually reprinted a few of their books that are back in stock now that people have been desperate to get hold of this year. So get them while you can, including a Commodore Amiga, a visual compendium, which is a real celebration. Games like Defender of the Crown, Barbarian, Marble Madness, Rainbow Islands, Populous, Cannon Fodder, Worms, all these incredible games, over 420 pages. They've got Game Boy, the box art collection, celebrating the boxes of Game Boy games, and not just stuff that we got here in the UK or the US, also Japanese games in there as well, and little tidbits in there as well that are going to give you really insightful information into these incredible games. And if you love role-playing games, their JRPG book is incredible, a guide to Japanese role-playing games, and we've done an entire episode about that as well, a real celebration of that genre, dating from the earliest days back in the 70s. So you can order all of those books. They're back in stock now on their website, and like Ravi mentioned, if you're quick, you might even get a free pair of Sonic socks as well, thanks to our friends at Bitmap Books. Check out their website, support the show, give our sponsors a bit of love, bitmapbooks.co.uk, and thank you so much to Sam and the team at Bitmap Books for their support of our podcast throughout 2021. Right then, what a year it's been for guests on this show. Shall we go right back to the start of the year then? I think this was actually the first guest that we had on the Retro Hour in 2021. It was an incredible guest. This is Nigel Searle, the former managing director of Sinclair. Of course, this year, tragically, we lost Sir Clive Sinclair, and he was definitely a genius. But actually, we talked to Nigel a bit and worked very closely with him back in the 80s about how working with Clive was, a real roller coaster, and how he was a bit of a misguided genius in many ways.
And then, of course, when game software started getting written for the ZX81, that expanded the market enormously. And that was something that Clive really wasn't interested in. He didn't want to be in the games business. I remember when I told him that for one of the Christmases, probably Christmas 73 maybe, we were going to package the Spectrum in a large box with, I think it was 6 different games on cassette tape. And he, it won't make any difference, he said. Won't make any difference. What do you want to do that for? I said, Clive, we've got to do something. We've got to freshen the product in some way or other. And we can negotiate deals with companies like Scion, who will give us one cassette for next to nothing, because if people like that game, they'll buy other Scion games. So we were going to have half a dozen games, did have half a dozen games from half a dozen different manufacturers, producers of games. And of course, it did incredibly well. The Spectrum was although it was never designed to be a games computer, Clive never wanted it to be a games computer. He had no interest in it being a games computer, but that's where most of its success lay.
I always got that impression as well, because there's that famous scene in Micro Men where he said, he didn't want to be known for Jet Set Willy. Was it kind of a bit of a frustration that these machines were selling by the bucket load to kids who wanted to play games, but he wanted to be seen as a serious computer company, do you think?
Yes, you see, Clive cut corners in the best possible way. He took a product like the Hewlett-Packard Scientific Calculator and said, most people can't afford whatever it was, £395 or something, 50 years ago. Huge amount of money. Most people can't afford that, but they'd accept, 3-digit, 4-digit accuracy. That's all they're getting from their slide rule, if that. They'd accept less accuracy if they could buy it for whatever it was, 69 quid. Later on, a lot less. And about the scientific calculator, he was absolutely right, because it was engineers and people who were buying it. It was no fun to play with. You did have to have a use with it. But later on, when he made similar calculations, balancing cost against capability, what it ended up doing was to driving the product down into the recreational area, whether it was the ZX80, 81, or even the Spectrum. People who seriously needed a powerful computer could afford to buy something more powerful. They didn't need to buy the cheapest one on the market. So the cheapest one on the market became the plaything. And that was great for people who wanted to play. And of course, he made the same trade-off when it came to the first electric vehicle that he did, the C5. If he had understood that would be a terrific vehicle for recreational purposes. I can't tell you how many people down here in Florida ride 3-wheel recumbent bicycles or tricycles. They lie very, very low on them. And nowadays, half of them have got an electric motor attached to them. So if you've ridden 15 miles with the wind behind you and you turn from home and you need a little help, you've got an electric motor. The C5 could, I can't claim that I saw it at the time, but certainly in retrospect, could have had a great market as a recreational thing. But Clive believed that people could be persuaded to commute to the nearest railway station in it. And of course, it never found that market because most people just felt it was too dangerous to be on the road.
So I love that episode. I mean, even though I didn't grow up with the Spectrum, it's just talking about Sinclair, such a legendary company here in Britain, and losing Sir Clive this year, it kind of does break my heart a bit that we never managed to get Clive on the show.
Yeah.
But I think, Nigel's probably the closest we're ever going to get to hearing, stories from the top in those days.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to hear someone's perspective that was, in there.
Yeah, right in the thick of it. So what about Joe then? You've picked out a favourite moment. This is an episode that we did back in the summer, all about Namco.
Yeah, this was Scott Rogers, who worked on a lot of games, but he briefly worked for Namco in the mid-90s. And for me, whenever I think of Namco and the PlayStation, I always think of Soul Blade. And he actually did a bit of work on Soul Blade, which was the first ever PlayStation game I played and got. So that was for me, a bit of a surreal moment to actually talk to one of the people who helped translate that game and come up with some of the ideas and stories of that game. So yeah, that was really, really cool for me and just a little bit mind-blowing to have him on. So we're now going to start talking about, funny enough, one of my favourite games of all time, and is actually the first ever game I played on PlayStation and the first ever game I played with my dad. Soul Blade.
Oh my gosh, Soul Blade.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that you really wasn't impressed with the likes of Tekken and Battle Arena Toshinden. What was that like then, suddenly you're now working for Namco, and all of a sudden, you're helping design Soul Blade? What was that like? What were your ambitions and stuff?
Well, now let me curb your expectations, because even though I did work on Soul Blade, my design input was minimal. At the time, I had been hired to help Bill come up with a bunch of new designs that we were going to turn into the next title that was being made by Namco Home Tech, which was the U.S. division we were working for. However, at the same time, Namco was converting Japanese games for the U.S. market. So they were taking Tekken and putting it on, they were localizing it and things like that. So a lot of my early work, the title that I got hired as at Namco was writer. And so I wrote, essentially, if you played the campaign mode of Soul Blade, I wrote all the color text for that. So there's things like, there's kind of backstory. Essentially, I got the stories from Japan about the characters, and some of them made sense and some of them kind of didn't make sense. And so I went to my boss and I said, look, how much freedom do I have to kind of play with this? And I had I went to film school. I had a screenwriting background. So I was like, I can, write whatever you want. Just let me know how much freedom do I have? And he was like, Japan and US, they never ever cross. The people in Japan play the Japanese games. The people in America play the American games. It really doesn't matter. So I said, well, I want to be true to what the original creators wrote. I don't want to do them a disservice, but I at least had some flexibility to kind of play around with the stuff. So I wrote essentially the backstories and the flavor stuff and all the dialogue for Soul Blade. What eventually became it was Soul Edge in Japan and it was Soul Blade in the US. And so I wrote that, and then I went out to Japan pretty early in my employment, and I believe they were finishing up the port of it, or they were finishing up Soul Edge or something. It was Soul Blade and Soul Edge were done, I think, concurrently, if I remember right. And they showed me some of the moves. I think it was either Cervantes and I like Cervantes because I like pirates, so I thought he was pretty cool. Yeah. And or it might have been I always forget who's the guy that has the wolf head and axe. Rock, was it? Yeah. Yeah. So it was one of those characters, and they were like, hey, we have some moves, but we don't really have names for them. Can you give us some cool names? So I wrote up, 10 or 12 different cool names, and they picked one of them. And to be honest, I don't even remember what they were. So I've named a couple of the moves in Soul Blade, but that was really it. It was not design work. I didn't do traditional designer work on that game. It was mostly writing.
And we do cover so much on this show. I mean, we cover, consoles that came out in the 80s and 90s. We cover home computers. Sometimes, though, we go real old school and we talk about things like mainframes and punch cards.
Yeah, so I just absolutely loved having Chris Crawford on the show. And I love these episodes where, you're talking about the really early stuff there, the roots of computing, the roots of video gaming. And Chris talks about, mainframes, and they were programming with punch cards, and he actually made Tactics, which was a game that was created using a board and a kind of computer game where you'd get the coordinates and stuff. It's a really interesting interview, and to hear all about how hard it was to actually get time on those machines, and how you had to come in the evening or nighttime to kind of get access to these computers, because people would actually provide you access, and you'd actually have to go there and book slots. It's really interesting to hear about that stuff. So here's Chris.
So I did an awful lot of Fortran programming on the mainframes in those days, and mostly what that involved was first you'd type up your program on the punch cards. We used the standard 80-column punch cards, and then you did all the punching in what was called the key punch room, because the key punch room was isolated from everything else, because the key punch machines were extremely loud. These weren't typewriters. These things had to punch holes in some thin cardboard cards, and so they hit hard, and so when you pushed a button, there was a loud bang, and then of course as you're typing, it's bang, 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 and of course there are a dozen other people in the same room going on, and so it was a huge loud cacophony of noise. Once you got your cards all set up, then you took them into the I/O room, where you handed your cards to a guy. You wrapped them in a rubber band, handed the cards to a guy who then put them in a box. And from there, they would be, at some point in the future, taken into the computer room, which mere mortals were not allowed to enter. And they would run the program, and it would print something out, and then they'd wrap your cards up in the printout and put it in a little box in the outer room. And but this took a while because there were so many programs running. And so there was something called the TAT board. TAT meant turn around time. And it was a chalkboard where they'd say, TAT, 3 hours, TAT, 8 hours. During the day, it would be typically 8 hours. So if you had a lot of work to do, you'd come in at 2 a.m. when the turnaround time was maybe 30 minutes. And so you could actually do interaction. You could put something in, see what happened. A short time later, put in another round. And that's the way we did computing back then.
Well, you mentioned that your dad was in the Air Force. Like back then, was it kind of military and educational scientific people that had access to computers and not the general public?
Well, my dad was a civilian engineer for the Air Force, but he, at the Air Force Base where the computer was, that was a general purpose computer that did all the work for the whole base. And so there were a lot of people using it. And so I was using a terminal, which was part of it. This was time sharing back then. That is, they could have 20 terminals scattered around the base, and you could put in your input, and it would go to the computer, and the computer would get around to processing it, normally within a minute, and then shoot the output back at you. And it came out in one of the standard terminals of the day, which looked like big typewriters on pedestals with printer paper coming out of them.
Well, what kind of programs were you writing on these machines?
Well, while I was a student, I was writing basically various kinds of research programs. I was pursuing a number of different research projects over the years. One was on the time series of meteor observations. That was something I was always interested in. Do they come randomly or not? Again, my master's thesis was on dynamical parallaxes. I also did a number of little bits and pieces for some of the professors, various little bits, fairly short programs, a few hundred lines. That was about all. When I was teaching, I had two main programs I worked on. The first was an educational program for my students called Black Hole Chicken, where they guided a rocket around a black hole and tried not to fall in, but they had to come as close to the Schwarzschild radius as possible without falling in. And then I also did my very first war game on that IBM 1130. And it turned out to be pretty good, considering the restrictions. I called it Tactics. It was a tactical armored combat game played on a hex grid, and that in itself was rather ambitious. The mathematics of calculating things in hex grids are a lot messier than rect grids, the rectangular, squares.
Yeah, and of course, if you want to check out the full episodes, I will link them up in our show notes. I love that chat with Chris as well. Someone else who we've had on the podcast a couple of times now and is always incredible value because, we talked about Games Master before. It was a guy who fronted Games Master, the original series back in the day. Dominic Diamond, who back in the summer came on for a second chat with us after the in-depth interview that we did with him last year, talking about the new book that hopefully we're going to get in our hands next summer. I believe the Kickstarter is now saying it's going to be May next year. But we talked to Dominic about who he got to do the foreword for the book, because obviously they had a lot of celebrities on Games Master back then. And it turns out that there could be a potentially very interesting podcast that could come out of this.
Well, I've seen there's a lot of quotes from celebrities here, and you've got like Robbie Williams doing the foreword as well.
That was the loveliest thing, I think, about the whole book. So we were talking, me and Jack, the editor, and we were saying, like, who could we get to do the foreword? And we were trying to think, well, let's have a guest that was on the show. And we thought, well, who's a guest that was on the show is still really big today, but also represents 90s culture so much. And basically it came down to Robbie or Zoe Ball. Really, they were the kind of two on the shortlist. So Jack had written to Robbie's agent, and then he'd said to me, he said, listen, I'll tell you what might help this. He said, Dominic, why don't you send an email to Robbie via his agent? And I'm like, oh, I don't know if he wants to bother with the likes of me these days. So I did it anyway, what I thought was an amusing little note, and it was the most surreal thing. It was like I get up in the morning in the frigid wastes of Calgary, north of the wall in Canada, and there's an email from someone called Rob W. And I'm like, who's that? And I click it, and it's this fantastic email from Robbie in Los Angeles, not only with the foreword already written, just the greatest foreword I could have possibly dreamed of, full of enthusiasm and how much he's loved the joystick, and it's been every house he's had since. But also this great little thing about how are you doing? What was the 90s like? And I've left all that stuff behind me now. I'm wanting to start gardening. So then I replied, I'm like, oh, Robbie, I love gardening these days. So there was about a week where I was swapping tips with Robbie and guiding him on things like horse manure. So that was a lovely little bonus to happen as a result of the book.
I'm looking forward to the Dominic Diamond and Robbie Williams gardening podcast.
That would be brilliant.
How much do you want to hear the Dominic Diamond and Robbie Williams gardening podcast?
I tell you, we still need to have gardening in this show. It would. Our main rivals are Gardener's World, so it would really push us over the edge.
Yeah, I'm thinking Ravi's Gardener slots for 2022. Is it Granny's Garden? That's a video game we could talk about.
Use green beans, toilet rolls for green beans. That's my tip.
Well, let's get another clip from Joe then. I love listening to this. I wasn't on this interview, but the Strike games, I loved those back in the day. And you were fortunate enough to chat to Flint Dilley.
Yeah, we spoke to him about, obviously his work on the Strike games. And for me, this is quite a funny running order for me because we spoke about Soviet Strike, which was the second ever PlayStation game I played, and the game I got was Soul Blade. So once again,
this podcast is just your life in gaming,
right? My life
Joe.
in gaming. So really, really surreal moment again. But I really enjoyed kind of talking about the controversies around Soviet Strike, and just how that actually made the game bigger. But it was a really fun episode. So was it quite scary writing the scripts and stuff for Soviet Strike? Because obviously Urban Strike, Jungle Strike and Desert Strike, they were quite controversial games for the time, because of the themes and what was happening in the games. Were you worried about any backlash, or did it just kind of help project it, further, like make it sell better and stuff?
Well, yeah, here's the deal. You think about my career up to that point. I'm working on Dungeons and Dragons, and you got people saying it's satanic. I'm working on Night Trap, and you got Joe Lieberman waving the game around. I'm working on something else. He waved I think Double Switch, but there was something else that he decided was going to destroy people's lives. And so we were just so used to it. And frankly, in some ways more controversial than any of that was a game. We skipped this, but it's an interesting little note here. For the first Gulf War, right, in the 1991 Gulf War, we did a game called, I was working with the guys at TSR on a Middle East, combat simulation game. Because remember, at that point, TSR owned SBI. And so we were still doing hardcore military games. And more importantly, they had the Tom Clancy license, and they did Red Storm Rising and Hunt for Red October. And so and George Bush had said, I've drawn a line in the sand. And he actually set a date where if Saddam Hussein didn't get out of Kuwait, we were going to start bombing. So we knew we had to ship the game by the deadline, right? Yeah. And so we changed the Middle East simulation game into a Gulf War simulation game, and we're playtesting it and realized, well, if you're the Americans, you don't. There's no reason to ever go into Iraq until you've just blown these guys into submission. And, because we had all the real live, Jane's military stats and everything else. We had a pretty good idea. We didn't know about F-117s and really all the capability. We didn't know about JDAMs and the real capabilities of Tomahawks. But we had a pretty good idea what, total air superiority would mean. So we released the game with two sets of rules. One was the realistic set of rules, where if you're the Americans, you just stand off and degrade the Iraqis, for the entire game. Yeah. And then the other was the playable set of rules, which were the Americans had to go in and you actually had to have battles. And the guys at the Air War College thought it was so funny that a bunch of boobs that made board games had pretty much figured out what the strategy was. Only because we were playtesting and you couldn't have any other strategy if you have real human lives on the line. So we got invited to the Air War College to speak at a convention called Connections. And I met some of the coolest people. I met John Warden, who was the actual strategist for the first Gulf War, who wrote the Air War Doctrine for it. And Jim Dunnigan, who, if you've never read The Quick and Dirty Guide to War, that is what Soviet Strike, the mentality of it came out of. Mm. And he designed a lot of games, a lot of military simulation games. There are a bunch of guys, Bruce Shelley, who used to go there, Sid Meier go there. Just an incredible collection of people. That was sort of an essential step in it. Is designing hardcore military strategy games, was very helpful later on.
Now, we spoke to Brenda Romero on the show a few months ago as well. Of course, just an icon in the video games industry. And one thing that we kind of find when we're talking to a lot of these veteran developers is that D&D connection. Dungeons and Dragons is kind of where it all began, isn't it?
Yeah, and Brenda started out working for Surtec when she was 15 and learning wizardry and doing support with that. And D&D is a huge foundation of kind of gaming, and it got a lot of people in the industry. So it's a really fascinating interview with her to, kind of hear how she went into that games design role.
Things eventually right themselves in that situation. But during this moping phase, my mother decides, look, if she's going to be exiled at home and sort of mope around, maybe the best thing to do is just to get her something. So somehow she managed to get this VIC-20, and that was a huge part of it. And then D&D comes along, and to me that changed everything, because I already had an overactive imagination, and suddenly this gave me a rule set for that overactive imagination. So I could build anything. In fact, I didn't need to go outside, and I going outside is absolutely fine, and I probably still didn't need to go outside. But I just loved it, absolutely loved it. And I would say, I know D&D was critical to even my husband's career. Quake was a character in D&D. The name of id Software, the I and the D in that, originally come from the name of their D&D group, which was In Demand. Yeah, so D&D is just. It's kind of like the parchment on which this industry is written.
100%. We've had so many guests that talk about D&D and how instantly they transferred into the industry.
Yeah, it's even when we're looking to, still to this day, when we're looking to hire game designers, I have a bit of a question. If somebody, well, yeah, no, I've never played D&D. How have you never played D&D? Because I consider it to be. To me, it's a foundational text of the game industry. It's just necessary. It's a foundational text. It's critical.
Well, when you joined Surtec, you were using the VIC-20 before. Did you start using Apple II machines and you learned Pascal, I understand?
I did. So I started using Apple II machines, and that was one of the great benefits of joining Surtec. There I had access to technology that there's zero chance we could have ever afforded. And they didn't have a problem with me, even though my hours initially were from 4 to 8. I would come in I'd come in as soon as I could get out of school, and I would stay as late as my mother would let me stay. And I had the benefit of working around some great people like Robert Woodhead, who is obviously one of the co-creators of Wizardry, or Arthur Brito for Rescue Raiders. I worked, I can't say right next to. There were I worked in the same office. There were several places that were all in part of the Ogdensburg Mall where Surtec was located.
How big was Surtec? What was the atmosphere like back then as well?
So when I first started the company, no, I didn't. When I first started at the company, I'd say there were probably 20 people, maybe. the development was even Robert Woodhead was there, Arthur Brito was there. So there was some development happening at the time. There was marketing, PR, accounting, in the executives and founders of the company, and then production. My job was pre-internet, pre-FAQ, so I was the FAQ, and people would, can you imagine being 15 and getting a job like this? I just had to memorize the games. And when people called and asked questions, I would tell them what the answers to those questions were. And I still, to this day, those questions and answers are so deeply embedded in my head. I can still, if people ask me questions about wizardry, I can still answer them as if I were on the call. But there, I find out that wizardry, I now basic, I feel like I've done everything I can do in basic. Many programmers, especially back then, realize that they can only do so much with basic, especially because basic is slow. So I wanted to know what the next thing was that I needed to do. And I knew that wizardry was written in USD C Pascal. And so that to me seemed to be the next thing I needed to learn. And so I begged, begged the high school where I was at to please offer a course in Pascal. So that was the next programming language for me. And then when I went to college, I took assembly language. But coding was, for me, I ended up on the design side, which I regret. In fact, I can say, well, wait a minute, let me correct that. I don't regret being a designer. I love being a designer. I regret letting go of the code.
Yeah, such an interesting lady. So definitely worth checking out that full episode with Brenda Romero if you've not heard it already. Now, we spoke to someone who I used to watch when I was a kid. I remember a series of documentaries that were shown over here on Channel 4 back in the mid-90s called The Triumph of the Nerds. And this was by a guy called Robert Cringely, who is a historian all about the computer industry. And you may know that a couple of years ago, there was that lost Steve Jobs interview that was actually released. That it turns out at the time, I mean, we got so many insights into that kind of early part of Silicon Valley from Robert, who was there covering it all at the time. But I love this chat that he had with us all about kind of what it was like, working with these pioneers, many of which can be quite difficult, guys like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And I think none of them more difficult, it turned out, than Jobs himself. Again, back to your Steve Jobs interview. I thought that was really interesting because, that was a unique moment, I thought, because you had Steve, who at the time, he was observing Apple as an outsider at that stage, wasn't he? Do you think that kind of made that interview quite unique compared to other ones that we've seen?
Well, I think a bunch of things made it unique. But yeah, it was 1995. It was, Next was in decline, but still running. We shot it at Next headquarters. And he hadn't gone back to Apple, and he couldn't even imagine going back to Apple. So he was ruthlessly honest at the time about both companies. He didn't particularly want to talk about Next because he was already dismissing the effort. So it was an interesting time. We were very lucky to catch him as we did. But when he came back to Apple, when he got a board seat out of it and he saw Gil Amelio, I knew, and I believe I wrote at the time, that there was no way that Steve was going to allow Gil to run things because Gil, while a perfectly reasonable manager, was hardly a visionary. And he was flailing so, and the company was flailing so, that Steve just, stepped up and took it over. And that didn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, just from watching that as well, I did kind of notice, I don't know if you kind of got the same vibe as well, that Steve at that time in 95, he seemed quite bitter about Microsoft's success as well. Imagine Windows 95, the big launch was happening around then. Did you kind of get that vibe off him, that he was a bit bitter of Bill Gates' success?
I'll tell you a funny story. I was, in 98, I pitched an article to Vanity Fair magazine. I was going to do a story about the relationship between Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And part of it was going to be how they viewed each other. And Graydon Carter, who was the editor of Vanity Fair, thought, that's great, let's do it. And so I contacted Steve and said, doing this story for Vanity Fair, I'm going to talk, I'll talk to you, I'll talk to Bill, and, I'll talk to a few other people, and we'll get a great story out of it. Let's do it. And at the time, 98, Apple needed publicity. This was a good thing. And Steve immediately called Graydon Carter up on the phone to make sure it was correct and to try to somehow get control of it. And Graydon stood up to him, which was good. And so Steve got back to me and he said, I'll do it, but you have to get Bill first. And so I had to then take the project to Bill and get him to sit down for an hour with me and to talk about Steve Jobs. The thing about getting an interview with Bill Gates is that it can be difficult, but it always happens. It's just procedures and dates and date books and schedules. And, eventually if you put in the legwork, it'll happen. So it took me about 8 weeks to get an interview with Bill. And so I went up to Seattle and I did the interview with Bill, and it was fun. It was great. He was thrilled to be talking about Steve. And so we just talked about Steve, and then I finished and I went home and I sent a message to Steve and said, okay, I've got Bill. Now, when can we schedule your interview? And Steve said, I don't think so. So Steve killed the project by refusing the interview, but he made me jump through hoops. He wasted weeks of my time. He wasted an hour of Bill's time. And this is the kind of sick guy he could be, where he did it just to be an asshole.
Now, Joe, I know you always love it when we get the YouTubers on, being someone who spends pretty much every evening instead of watching telly on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't watch TV. I watch YouTube videos. I fall asleep to YouTube videos, and I always have to sneak a YouTuber in there when we do our best bits. And this was actually one of the first episodes of 2021. We had Norm, the gaming historian, on, who is actually one of my favorite YouTubers of all time. He's probably maybe in my top 3 channels. And I just loved having him on and talking to him obviously as close to getting to meeting him as possible and just kind of realizing he's a real person. For me, these YouTubers are like celebrities, so it was really fun. And the part I picked, which I really loved, that he even made an episode about this, and then that we spoke about it, but we spoke about the facts that he got wrong. And I just really enjoyed how humble he was, and how open and stuff he was about it. So yeah, here we go.
I had gotten a message from somebody who pointed out an error in a previous video, and I went back and looked at it, and I was like, I can't believe I got that wrong. I can't believe I made that error. And I had just seen from previous experience other people that when somebody points out an error, and like you said, you can't be wrong on YouTube. And I guess I wanted to change the perspective that, yes, we are not robots. I am a human being and I am prone to errors, especially when it comes to history. New stuff comes out all the time with history, and it's very common for historians to make errors. So I guess I just wanted to let people know that I'm human and I do make mistakes. And I guess I wanted to poke fun at myself a little as well. So that's why I made that video. It was fun looking back at my early videos and just seeing the production quality and what I was doing. And
did you miss your long hair?
Yeah, exactly.
I always love it when Joe fangirls everything.
Oh yeah, I always do.
Yeah, Norm was incredible. I definitely worth a listen back to that episode. Like you said, the fact not many people go back and actually admit they're wrong. So it was very brave of him to do that, I think. Now, this year, we've had some amazing guests on, and one thing that I think the more that we do this show, as the years go by, we're coming up to 6 years now that we've been doing this, I think we're often reminded how important it is to capture these stories for future generations, because we've had a lot of people on the show now who are sadly no longer with us. And someone who we only had on a couple of months ago, who we found out a week later had unfortunately passed away, was Rob Reynard.
Yeah, I absolutely loved Motocross Madness when I was a kid, and I thought it was a real pioneering game when graphics cards just came in and the kind of Pentium chips, and it really pushed the limits. And Rob came on, and it's still quite shocking that he passed away so quickly since doing the episode. This is probably his last interview out there.
Yeah.
And he talks in this about LAN parties, how much fun they were, and how Bill Gates reacted to seeing the game. Another aspect of it that was really huge and good fun back then were LAN games. Did you ever have any big Motocross Madness LAN parties?
Guys, it got out of control. We started doing Friday nights, so we could do eight players at a time in MCM. And Friday nights, folks started from around Phoenix, started showing up at the studio. And we'd race until 10 a.m. or noon on Saturday. I mean, there was a lot of smoking and drinking and playing going on for many, many hours. We'd get 2 or 3 groups of 8 people racing at once. And it got to where I had a friend, Roger, he owned a racetrack in New Mexico. He would drive 10 hours just to come over here and play. Wow. Guys drove in from LA. Some of Steph's friends and whatnot, they would come in from LA to play. And then Stephen Cameron, he ran a big Xbox gaming site. He lives in Canada. A couple times a year, he'd hop a flight and fly down to Phoenix just to hang out and race with us. So, yes, we did a lot of it, and it got out of control.
Well, the ragdoll effects and the crashes, I mean, they were great fun in the game and, hilarious as well. I mean, was there a huge focus on getting them as kind of realistic as possible?
Yeah, at first we had no idea. We were focused on make the bike fun to drive, make a fun racing game, well-designed racetracks. But then all of a sudden, when we would crash, we found ourselves laughing hysterically when it was a particularly violent crash. So that just woke us up, and we watch kids play, and some of them, they would just crash the bike over and over and over. So yeah, that refocused our attention, and we spent a lot more time creating different presets of animation so that we had like an over the handlebars animation, and over the left side, over the right side, we call it high siding, and then the come down straight too hard and just bottom out the suspension and go flying. So we ended up with like 6 different categories of animations, because it proved to be so incredibly entertaining. And we knew after that, we spent probably more time on the rider than we did on the bike.
Well, Motocross Madness 2, even though it was only 2 years later, it kind of felt like the industry, technology was moving really fast around that time. And obviously you had the improved graphics, you had trees and stuff in there as well. Over 40 tracks in that game too. It felt like a much more complete package. How did you improve the engine of the original game and take advantage of this, more powerful hardware that people had then?
Yeah, so as far as the ground goes, we were able to do multi-texture layers. So we had like a high-resolution texture for the ground, and then we had a low-resolution detail texture that tiled, that added a depth that made it look like the ground was just higher resolution everywhere. Certainly the trees and the ecosystem was a big deal. I think, and I'm kind of fuzzy on these numbers, Mark would probably yell at me, but I think we had upwards of 100,000 trees out there. So going from 0 to 100,000 was quite a number. Actually, I remember one day we were at Microsoft demoing it for Bill Gates. First, the Microsoft guys gave me a bet that I couldn't say shrubbery more than 5 times in the demo. So I kept pointing out the amazing shrubberies to Bill as we were driving. And here's a different style of shrubbery here for you to see. And then we were running a debug build, and in the debug build, the camera collision against the ground was shut off so that the artists could take the camera down below the ground and look up at things, because sometimes it helped you see errors that were hard to see from above the ground. And we're riding along, and Bill doesn't say a lot in the demos. He's just looking for something to nitpick. So we're driving along, and I like driving with the camera down real low, and I clipped the side of a hill, and it just for a split second, it went under the ground. He goes, "What was that?" And I go, "Oh." And I saw the Microsoft team just freak out. Like they were utterly terrified that Bill was going to light them up for something. Yeah, and I stopped. I go, "Oh, actually, check this out. This is kind of cool." So I stopped and I put the camera completely under the ground and flew it around. And I'm like, well, from under the ground. So, when you're under the ground, the terrain shuts off because the normals all just face up. You can get a good idea of the density of all of our shrubbery that we have down here from below the ground. And then the Microsoft guys are back there laughing, and Bill's like, "Oh, that's cool. This is completely amazing." And you're like, "Yeah, thanks." And put the camera back up and took off. But there was like 1 second there that they thought that, oh no, this is the end of our career because Bill's about to drop the hammer on us.
Yeah, so it was incredible that we were able to record Rob's story before he sadly passed away. And of course, our thoughts are with his friends and family.
Yeah, rest in peace, Rob.
Yeah, really difficult time, but we're pleased that we were able to share that with you all. Now, we did pass a landmark this year, episode 300 of this podcast that we recorded on Halloween, actually. And it was the first episode of this show that we actually did live, wasn't it, to our patrons?
Yeah, that was really good fun. I can't believe we've hit that mark as well.
We hit that mark and we didn't blow up Dan's studio with like the 8 cameras and like 5 computers.
It was hot in there though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was amazing to do it.
Yeah, we were joined by Clint from LGR, Kim Justice, Dimitris from Modern Vintage Gamer. One of my favourite episodes of this podcast that we've ever done. It was just, a real honest chat about all things retro gaming and retro technology. And I love this moment in there where we got their opinions. Obviously, these are content creators who cover this stuff all the time, and we thought we'd get their thoughts on what the future of retro is going to be.
Remakes and remasters, I think, is the way forward. Really, I mean, I worked on Quake. We've got other games at Night Dive that we're working on that we're bringing back. I mean, I think a lot of studios, a lot of publishers are really big on remakes now. Whether the remake is better than the original is kind of irrelevant, but I think a lot of publishers are seeing the value of remaking. I mean, Dead Space was announced for a remake. I think really that's kind of the way forward with the next kind of generation or two of video games. I think there's a lot of value there for that kind of stuff.
What do you think, Ken?
I think, remakes again is something that seems to become quite normalised. I remember a few years ago, you'd get a remake announced and a lot of people would complain. And it seems like gradually less and less people are kind of almost just seeing it as remasters, even in like cases where it's a game that's only a couple of years old. That seems to then suddenly get a remake come out for it. I think as far as the future goes, I mean, certainly it seems like all of this is going to be digital. For a start, I mean, the physical media just seems to be not long for this world, especially when it comes to new games. And even for older games, whether it's the prices going up to ridiculous levels, being pushed up through rather illicit means, or the general degradation of physical media goes in general, you're going to see more and more retro people turn into things like the Mister and Raspberry Pis and so forth to get an authentic experience, which I think in some ways it's not necessarily bad at all, because I mean that opens anything that that opens it up more to people is something I'm here for. I mean, if we were still just relying on physical media for our old games as opposed to everything else, and the prices going up as it is, it become a much more insular hobby and it would just die out in the end.
And you're getting like discless systems coming out and stuff, and they're often the cheaper option, so more people might be getting them. Discs and physicality seem to be a bit of a luxury.
That's like swearing to our ears.
I know.
Sorry, I was literally thinking, I can't imagine Clint's too happy about that, with where things are going.
Yeah, the weird thing is, I bought one of those discless systems with the PS4. Wow. Because I realized that with the PS4, I was at the PS4 and a PS4 Pro, and I bought a grand total of 2 physical games for that entire platform. But I had over 100 digitally, just because it was getting easier at that point when I finally got an internet connection that wasn't throttled and had caps and all these things. So it made more sense at that point, just because I don't play consoles very much at all. I play stuff mostly on PC, and everything on PC is pretty much digital. It's been that way for such a long time that I was already getting used to it. And so by the time the PS5 came around, I'm like, well, fine, this one's available, and I purchased it, and it's been okay. And for these kind of systems anyway, it doesn't really seem like having the physical copy makes much more of a difference to preservation anyway, because all these servers are going to go down, or some other thing is going to break, or they're just going to re-release it or redo it in some other form, or hopefully eventually it'll all be able to be emulated and imitated and simulated on some, like, that's my dream, is that retro just goes to a completely platform agnostic thing where we're just running code on some other device. We don't have to rely on old things at all. That would be great. I mean, which seems a little absurd considering how much of what I do relies on the old hardware and software. But I know that
You're breaking my heart with your realism.
Physically,
oh my god!
Yeah, I'm physically surrounded by old games and boxes, and I've got a massive collection of things over there. And I've been enthralled with this original Xbox over there that I got the other week, and it's like I'm having a ton of fun with that. But I know that we're in this weird little finite period of time where it's just a transition to whatever's next, and I don't know. I just sort of accepted, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago, where it's like, this is where it's going, and you either embrace it now and have fun now, or you just get really cranky. And I think both they're valid, but somewhere in between for me is where I found the most enjoyment, because there's that trade-off between ease of access right now versus not having it at all later in the future. And I know that they're constantly tugging at each other, because, we're making trade-offs now by not being able to have these things in the future, perhaps.
So yeah, definitely worth checking back, episode 300. And there's a video version of that on our YouTube as well, if you want to check it out. I'll link that up in our show notes. Now, one that we had recently, and actually has made a few headlines. I saw that Nintendo Life and a few other news sources have actually been running this as a pretty major headline over the last couple of days, is from an interview that we did last month with Mark Subotnick.
Yeah, we only did this. Yeah, like you say, it was about 3 weeks ago. And we were talking about what happened to Geist Force, the unreleased Dreamcast game that Mark Sputnik was working on. For me, this was probably my number one interview for the year. It was an emotional roller coaster when he told the story. And, my heart sank. I also got goosebumps. And I loved how honest he was. And he literally said, you know what? It's been 20 years. Let's just talk about it. So yeah, this is Mark Sputnik's story on what happened to Geist Force.
So this is a sad story, and I'm gonna tell the truth. And if it comes back to bite me for telling the truth here, so be it. Because there's no love lost in how this actually went down. The team was doing decently well. We had started to really discover fun. We were challenges on getting the cutscenes done. We had pulled in a third-party company, and some of that we were hitting some bumps in the road on, but otherwise we were doing all right. We had shown at TGS, and people were relatively excited about the progress of the game, and it looked amazing, and people were quite excited about how it looked. And to be honest, for a launch title, that's really what you want, right? Something that you put in and go, okay, that's why I got a next-gen system. Nice if it plays well too. But job one was making sure it looked pretty. So it did. Naka came to visit with his team to tour our studio, look at our tools and engine, which we had a lot of proprietary, really phenomenal tech going. I would say still to this day, some stuff that I haven't seen replicated quite at the level we had. And he didn't realize that the white people on my team, a lot of them spoke fluent Japanese, including my lead engineer. And started speaking in Japanese, assuming that no one would understand, started talking about what parts of our tech they were going to take for Sonic US, and then basically said, as soon as they ship, fire everyone but one of the engineers who knows their system, and roll him onto our team for Sonic. And my team heard all that. So you can imagine how they felt.
Yeah.
Here's a leader of Sega. I mean, Naka's pretty powerful at Sega at that time. There was two camps. There was the Naka camp and the Yu Suzuki camp. I'm sure you've got that well documented in your previous chats with others. That's also history now and known. But he wielded quite a bit of power. So I had a group of 5 engineers that now knew that was potentially happening to their baby. They were, outside of Visual Concepts, the only people in North America working on a 128-bit gaming console. Pretty easy to go get another job. So they did. Yeah. And I had to go to Bernie and tell him, I just lost my 5 lead engineers. I got a proprietary engine. Even if I got a burn rate of X. I won't quote that. I'm not going to go into all his dirty secrets, but a healthy burn rate for that time. We were an expensive launch title for that time. Nowadays, we wouldn't have been an indie title. It'd be like a really cheap indie title. But for then, it was a lot of money. It was impossible to justify nor get. It would have taken me 2 months to hire, another 2 months to ramp up, and then, So 4 months of burn rate where pretty much nothing's happening. So we went to Visual Concepts, and I had a chat with Greg and Scott and said, hey, any chance you have the bandwidth to take this on? They didn't. They were more than willing to give us space to finish the game there if we could get, funding or the team with total support, nothing negative against them at all. They were amazing. But we just couldn't find a way to land it, and had to go tell the team, hey, the rest of the time we're here, work on your resumes.
I've got a feeling Yuji Naka is going to be getting on the next plane and duffing you up there, Joe.
Yeah, he might do.
Putting that story out there.
Flying one of his space planes as a...
the thing I love about that interview is, we've done a lot more kind of console-y stuff this year, and I think we've got a lot more diversity around the interviews, and it was great to start getting some stories from Sega and stuff like that, which, Joe, definitely, you were in your element there.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and there's hopefully more of that to come as we get into 2022 as well. So what a year it's been for interviews. Your final best of the year then, Ravi, and this was someone who is just an icon in the dance music industry, particularly drum and bass. We've got DJ Aphrodite on the show back in the early part of the year.
I love those kind of old school tunes, and especially people that used Amiga to make them. And Aphrodite is actually an absolute legend and someone that I've listened to throughout my childhood, and I'm sure you have, Dan, as well. And it was just amazing to have him on the show, and add to people like Pete Cannon that we had on the show as well this year, and just some amazing musicians.
The two Amigas were in sync, then the track could be played.
And were they like literally Amiga 500s? And was it just a case of listening to the click track and then hitting spacebar at the right time?
Yeah, I mean, for example, at the beginning of your track, I have 4 blocks of clicks and then 1 block of silence. The other Amiga will have 3 blocks of clicks and 1 block of silence. So he gets his mouse ready at the end of my first block and then plays his one, and then will speed up and slow down to get the click in sync, so that so it's flanging really tightly through the speakers. We did that with actually 4 computers, but because there was too many things playing at the same time, it got a bit messy. It always sounded better the less tracks you had playing, because less is more with music production.
Yeah, and I think there might be a tendency for a lot of, especially new producers, to just kind of throw everything in there and try and overcomplicate things.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I've gone from Amiga to Logic, I'm guilty of the same thing myself.
Well, talk us through a bit about that kind of Amiga setup that you had then. You had the 4 Amiga 500s then. I mean, did you have samplers? What kind of things were you running these through?
No. For the very first one in 1990, there was just 4 Amigas. That was it. We did have a guitar on one of them. But when we went to 2 Amigas, say the first single, Some Justice, that was literally just 2 Amigas. And how we mixed that down was it went into a standard Newmark mixer, DJ mixer with 4 channels. We got the balance as best we could and the EQ as best we could from the samples and from the Amiga. And then it went into the DJ mixer. There was a little bit of Aural Exciter, and then it went straight onto the DAC.
So there you go. If you want to check out any of these interviews, maybe you got a couple of weeks off over Christmas, and maybe there's some bits in here you thought, I missed that episode. I'll put them all in our show notes as well. I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone, not only all of our guests that have been on the show and taken their time to talk to us this year, everyone that's listened to an episode, anyone that's got in touch with us on social media, anyone that's retweeted an episode or tagged their friends in it, anyone who's donated to us on Patreon. Seriously, it's just all come together to make an incredible year for this show, I think.
100%. It's been amazing, and just thank you to everybody who's checked us out.
So we are going to be putting our feet up for the only week of the year that we take off. We're going to have a bit of, I think it's fair to say, well-deserved break after an incredible year on this podcast. Thank you again for checking us out in 2021. I hope you get to enjoy a little bit of peace and quiet and a bit of time with the family over the next couple of weeks. Have a very Merry Christmas, and we will see you again in 2022. Merry Christmas.
Ciao.